Hello, everybody. It's your friendly digital technology librarian, Christy here. We've reached another Friday, so of course, I have another Film Rec Friday ready for everybody out there. Uh, so I don't know if anyone else has experienced this, but in the last few weeks, I've seen a major uptick in mentions of Stranger Things and the upcoming season. Of course, we do know that the final season of Stranger Things is going to be released sometime this year in 2025, but we don't have a firm date. That said, it doesn't matter whether we're talking about my personal social media feeds, work-related social media feeds, just news feeds in general. I have seen so many articles both about the cast members and the creators, as well as just the show in general, and it's just been really, really interesting to see this very sudden influx of information. And I know I am getting very, very excited about the upcoming season, even though I don't know when it's coming. And I think other people may be in the same boat. So I thought today would be the perfect day to launch the first in what I'm sure will be a string of posts all about what to watch as we wait for the Stranger Things series finale, and that is season 5. And yes, I did say the very first, because there will definitely be more. I wanted to sort of focus on different things each episode that we do for this. And this first episode, I kind of wanted to focus a little bit on the Duffer Brothers and the Duffer Brothers inspiration. The Duffers, of course, were the duo that created Stranger Things. They are current showrunners as well as frequent writers and frequent directors of the series. This is their baby. And it's interesting, as someone who grew up in, say, like the 80s, I 100% recognize so many of their reference points, and I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about that today. In particular, one author who I think pretty much anyone who is really interested in the horror genre has at the very least a base knowledge of. So we'll get to that once we talk about our 2 recommendations today. But I'm really excited for this. Again, definitely looking forward to the 5th season, and certainly excited to share thoughts and ideas with other people who are also fans. So as always, the recommendations I have for you today are available entirely for free to Milan-Berlin library card users. So yeah, without any further ado, let's get to those recs. Okay, the first movie that I wanted to talk about today is the Duffer Brothers' lead into Stranger Things, as far as production that they really had a lot of creative control over, and that is 2015's Hidden. Now, Stranger Things was released on Netflix in 2016. Hidden, however, was made a few years before that, but it ended up in this sort of weird production limbo. The studio just would not release it in a way that they had initially been promised. The Duffer Brothers had been initially promised. So there are a lot of things that just didn't fall in place for them. But 100% you can absolutely see from the Hidden film that they had the building blocks that it was going to take to get to Stranger Things. Once Hidden was released, they were hired to work on certain episodes of Wayward Pines. They had a chance to work with M. Night Shyamalan, and this movie really helped get them to where they needed to be. But this film could definitely have been bigger if it had not been plagued with some production side elements. So in Hidden, we are dealing with a small, seemingly average American family. Ray and Claire are a young husband and wife, and their young 7-year-old daughter Zoe are, kind of isolated, but they very clearly care for each other. They're, as much as can be possible in this world setting that we've got, a happy family. But you suddenly very quickly realize that they are isolated in a bomb shelter because they're existing in this sort of odd post-apocalyptic world. And there are a lot of twists and turns in this universe that we're working with, and each and every one of those twists and turns is really exciting and really engaging. Ray and Claire are played by Alexander Skarsgård and Andrea Riseborough, and then Zoe is played by Emily Allen Lind, who I had not been at all familiar with before. Of course, she's a small child, so I don't know how much work she'd had prior to this, but all three of these performers do an immensely solid job. The character that I really wanted to focus on specifically for this discussion is Ray, the father. Skarsgård does a fantastic job with him. There is, from the very get-go, a sense of urgency about him. His main goal, his main purpose in his existence is to make sure that Claire and Zoe are okay. Zoe more so than anything else, but there's almost a visceral quality to his desperation. And right away, I sort of connected his character to father characters in, say, A Quiet Place or Train to Busan. And if you've watched this channel at all, I've talked about Train to Busan dozens of times probably at this point. And I'm a sucker for these films where you've got that father-child relationship that is so compelling. And when you put them in these situations, these like life or death apocalyptic universes, there's just this inevitable connection to them. Whatever kind of character they were before the moment that we are introduced to them, it can only serve to enhance what we're going to see on screen. And in Hidden, this is no different for Ray. That entire film, I think, is served by his character and everything that he does to keep Claire and Zoe breathing. There are definitely some rough parts in this film, like plot-wise. There are moments when the pacing is not quite as even as I would like. You can tell this is an early bigger product for the Duffers. But that said, I think this is 100% worth the watch because it sort of shows you where they were before we get to Stranger Things. It shows you they've always had this flair, this vibe, but it needed some time to develop. Now, after Hidden was released, they actually were able to broker a deal where they were working on certain episodes of Wayward Pines, which is a phenomenal series if you get the chance to watch it. And they got to work with M. Night Shyamalan, who they had very much admired as far as artistry goes. And you can see how being able to work on this production team with a thematically darker show, how that really, really aided them with Stranger Things, because it's definitely this very, very well-ironed machine by the time that they're releasing Stranger Things. It really is. So if you're interested in seeing, like a first step to today's Duffer Brothers, 100% you should check out 2015's Hidden. Even if you're not a Duffer Brothers fan, you don't care about Stranger Things, any of that. If you just like a really well-made sort of thriller/horror film that really delves into a family dynamic, especially father-child, make sure you check it out. It is so good in that respect. I love the character building and the character relationships in this. It's so good. Again, this is one that is perfect both for Duffer Brothers fans and for non-fans. So again, definitely think checking out Hidden is well worth the watch. Okay, my other recommendation for today is actually a documentary from 2022, and it is all about an author that was hugely influential to the Duffers, and that is Stephen King in the documentary King on screen. So anyone who is a horror fan, I think, is probably at least passingly familiar with Stephen King and his work. He has been a massive influence on the horror genre for decades at this point, continues to be relevant, continues to work on really exciting projects. And King on Screen is great because it really does span the entirety of his film career. So what I really love about this is all of the interviews. They interview Frank Darabont. They interview at one point the Duffer Brothers. They talk to so many of the directors who've worked on his projects, and it's really interesting to listen to how they describe his influence on them, regardless of what kind of horror film they were working on or what kind of movie in general, because not all Stephen King stories are traditional horror stories. They really aren't. When you think of like Shawshank Redemption, absolutely not a horror story. It's actually a beautiful sort of drama that is very much life affirming, even though a huge portion of it takes place in a horrible prison. But I digress. This documentary talks to film directors who just love movies and love making movies and love Stephen King's work. Now, as a big Stephen King aficionado, this kind of documentary is absolutely right up my alley. I love hearing people like Frank Darabont talk about films and talk about working on them, just because it always becomes very clear how much he loves movies. And I think anyone who works in the industry, when you are so connected to your own art form, it's just sort of magical to hear someone talk about it. When it's not about ego necessarily, or, you know, this sort of self-aggrandizing thing, but just like the love they have for movies and movie making. It just, and several of the people they talk to are very much embody that vibe. King on Screen also has a really unusual opening, enough so that I wondered if I had clicked on the wrong thumbnail by accident. I don't want to give anything away because, like I said, it was just a real surprise, but it's definitely not a traditional opening for a documentary. But as soon as that's over, it goes right into the interviews. And again, that's where this thing shines. Some documentaries are very much into telling a story through just like chronicling a writer's or a director's or actor's work, right? Like you don't get as much first person sourcing as this, and I really did love that, and they've picked such interesting people to talk to. Most of these directors are people that I have admired and enjoyed watching for years and years, and some of the things that I've loved the most have nothing to do with Stephen King. So to go back and hear them talk about the project that they've worked on, or even just to hear them talk about like certain elements of the production. There's this moment when they're talking about practical effects in Misery, in the film adaptation of Misery, that made me both sick to my stomach, but also absolutely made me go and rewatch Misery, because I haven't seen it in decades. I mean, honestly, as good as that film and as good as that book was to me when I initially read them or watched them, I'd not seen it for years and years and years and years. And the way that these people talked about this one particular scene, it had me so curious and so baffled as to how a practical effect would work that I had to go watch it. And let me tell you, CGI special effects are so amazing, but there's something about practical work that it's just hard to beat, man. Like, it is just hard to beat. And the problem solving that has to go into something, it pays off when it's done really well. And there is a particular scene in Misery that, man, I don't think it would be as effective any other way. And the other thing about that was they talk about why they make a shift from the novel to the film adaptation, why they change a certain thing. And again, hearing them talk about it, man, like, it is absolutely the right choice. There are times when you have to make a change, and as much as I'm one of those people who's like the book is always better, every once in a while you come upon something where no, that was actually even more effective. And I do think Misery is one of those examples. um you get to see a ton of really familiar faces as far as actors go, because King movies do tend to have this like cadre of cast members you'll see over and over again. Of course, you see Stephen King in a lot of cameos throughout his film adaptation career as well, but really truly, like, there are several actors that you see multiple times in different film adaptations. And we get to hear from them in addition to getting to hear from the behind the scenes creators. And I don't know, this was just really, really fun and engaging, even for someone who's seen like probably a dozen Stephen King documentaries. One would think, well, there's nothing new to be done there. You've talked about everything, but this just has a really fresh take on a lot of different themes that we find throughout his film adaptations. So if you are a Stephen King fan, 100,000% you need to watch this. But even if you're not a King fan, even if you aren't really that big on horror as a genre, if you love movies, if you like the process of movie making, if you're interested in any of that, 100% you should check out King on Screen, because it covers those things, and it covers those things through the lens of people who love movies as much as they enjoy making them. So again, King on Screen, definitely check them out. Check it out. Both of these titles are available via our Canopy service, and again are free via your Milan-Berlin library card. Okay, so those were my 2 recommendations for today. As I mentioned before, there will definitely be more Stranger Things related episodes up through whenever we end up getting that 5th season release. But until then, if you happen to have any recommendations for things other Stranger Things fans should be watching as we count down to that season 5 release, pop those in the comments below. If you have any thoughts about the 2 films that I recommended today, definitely share those thoughts as well. As always, thank you so much for joining me. Today was delightful to work on. You guys know how much I love the genre in the first place. So again, thanks so much for joining me, and hopefully I will see you next time. Bye-bye.